The Executioner's Touch by Janson Davies. Chapter 1. The Planet of Death. The stars did not shine over Mortania. They hung like distant eyes, cold and indifferent, beyond the reach of the planet's cursed orbit. Cloaked in perpetual dusk, Mortania was a place the galaxy had forgotten, or pretended to. It was not charted on civilian maps. No trade routes passed near it. No signals were sent to it. It was a prison, not for criminals, but for a race that had once walked among the living as gods. The Grim Reapers. Paul Erebus stood at the edge of a jagged cliff, his silhouette carved against the violet haze of the planet's dying sky. His cloak, woven from obsidian thread, fluttered in the windless air. Beneath it, his skin shimmered faintly, like starlight trapped in flesh. He was over 400 years old, young by Reaper standards, but ancient by any other measure. He had not spoken to another living being in decades. The wind here did not whisper. It howled in silence. The soil was ash. The trees were petrified bones. Mortania was not a place of punishment. It was a place of containment. The Reapers had once been revered, feared, worshipped, but their touch, swift, final, irreversible, had become too dangerous, too absolute. So the galaxy had exiled them. All but one. Paul was the exception, the galaxy's executioner. When the Galactic Tribunal passed a sentence of death, it was Paul who carried it out. No blade, no poison, no spectacle, just a touch. A single moment of contact, and the condemned vanished, painlessly, silently, utterly. Billions feared him. Billions more reviled him. But none could deny the necessity of his existence. It was the only way he could leave this place. A low chime echoed from the calm stone embedded in his wrist. The sound was ancient, ceremonial. A summons. Paul turned from the cliff and walked toward the landing platform carved into the mountain's spine. His ship awaited him. The Styx, a vessel as black and silent as the void itself. The tribunal had called. A new execution had been ordered. Paul did not ask who. He did not ask why. He never did. The condemned sat in silence. He was a warlord from the shattered moons of Virex III, responsible for the vaporization of 3 colonies. His crimes were not in question. The tribunal had ruled. The sentence was death. Paul Erebus stood before him, cloaked in shadow. The warlord's eyes burned with defiance. "You think I fear you," he spat. "I've killed thousands. I've watched stars die. What is one touch compared to that?" Paul didn't answer. He never did. He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. The guards backed away, their weapons useless against what he was. The air grew still. The warlord's bravado cracked. His breath hitched. Paul raised his hand. The warlord lunged, desperate to strike first, but Paul's fingers brushed his chest. And the warlord was gone. No scream, no collapse, no blood, just absence. A ripple in the air, a memory erased. The guards stared at the empty space where a man had stood seconds before. One of them whispered, "He didn't even blink." Paul turned and walked away. In his mind he saw the warlord's final expression, not fear, but recognition, as if in that last instant he understood what Paul truly was. Not a killer, an executioner. Chapter 2. A summons from the core. The Styx sliced through the void like a blade through silk. Its hull, matte black and rippleless, absorbed starlight as it moved. An absence more than a presence. Inside, Paul Erebus sat in the command cradle, surrounded by silence. The ship required no crew, no navigation. It responded to his thoughts, his instincts. It was an extension of him, designed for one purpose: to deliver death. The tribunal's message pulsed in the air like a heartbeat. Paul opened the encrypted file. A hologram flickered to life, cold, clinical, faceless. The voice belonged to a synthetic adjudicator, one of the Tribunal's AI proxies. It spoke without emotion, without pause. But as he stepped into the ship and the doors sealed behind him, something stirred in the air. A tremor, a whisper, a warning. This time would be different. Subject, Helen Standish, species human, age 29, charges, 37 counts of unlawful death, sentence, capital execution, method, Reaper protocol, executor, Erebus, Paul. Paul's eyes narrowed. 37. That was rare. Most executions were singular. One crime, one sentence. This was different. The tribunal had flagged her as dangerous, irredeemable. But something in the file didn't add up. No motive, no pattern, no resistance, just contact. Paul leaned back, letting the ship's neural interface scan the file deeper. Helen Standish had lived on the Outer Rim, in a colony known for its isolation. Her victims had all died in proximity. No weapons, no wounds, just sudden collapse. The authorities had traced the deaths to her presence, and the tribunal had ruled. But Paul saw something else. The deaths weren't intentional. They were clustered around moments of intimacy, handshakes, embraces, accidental brushes. It was as if Helen herself didn't know what she was. The sticks accelerated toward the tribunal's holding station, a floating fortress orbiting the gas giant Virex 9. Paul had been here before. It was where the condemned waited, unaware of how swift their end would be. He didn't feel pity. He wasn't allowed to. But something about Helen Standish unsettled him. As the ship docked and the airlock hissed open, Paul stepped into the sterile corridor. Guards backed away instinctively, their eyes wide with fear. No one touched the Reaper. No one dared. A warden approached, holding a data slate with trembling hands. "She's in cell 7, he said, voice barely audible. "She's calm. Too calm." Paul nodded once and walked past him. The corridor stretched like a vein through the station's heart. Lights flickered overhead. Surveillance drones hovered silently. Paul's boots made no sound. He was a shadow given form. Outside cell 7, he paused. Inside sat a woman with white hair and eyes like storm clouds. She looked up as he entered and smiled, not with fear, not with defiance, with recognition. Paul froze. Helen Standish stood slowly, her gaze locked on his. "You're the one they send," she said softly. "The one carries out their justice." Paul said nothing. Helen stepped forward, close enough to touch. "I've been waiting for you." And then, without hesitation, she reached out and pressed his hand to her cheek. Nothing happened. No death, no vanishing, no silence, just warmth. Paul staggered back, heart pounding. Helen didn't flinch. "I'm like you," she whispered. "I've always been like you. A Reaper." Chapter 3. The Woman Who Didn't Flinch. Paul Erebus had touched thousands. He had ended warlords, tyrants, assassins, and traitors. He had erased lives with the same quiet finality each time. No resistance, no delay. His touch was law. It was the last word in a galaxy that had forgotten mercy. But Helen Standish didn't vanish. She stood before him, her cheek pressed to his palm, her breath steady. Her skin was warm, her eyes impossibly calm. Paul pulled his hand back as if burned, but she didn't recoil. She stepped closer. "You felt it too, didn't you?" she said. Paul's voice was low, unused. "What are you?" Helen smiled, but it wasn't cruel. It was weary. "I told you I'm a Reaper, and I've always been one." Paul's mind raced. It wasn't possible. Reapers were born, not made. They were rare, exiled, monitored. Helen had slipped through the cracks of history, living among mortals, leaving a trail of accidental deaths. 37 lives lost, not through malice, but proximity. "I didn't know," she said. "Not at first. I thought I was cursed. I tried to stay away from people, but sometimes they reached for me." Paul studied her. She was younger than him by centuries, but her eyes held the same weight, the same isolation, the same guilt. "You should be on Mortania," he said. Helen shook her head. "I escaped detection. I've lived in hiding. Until they found me. Until they blamed me." Paul paced the cell, the walls closing in. This changed everything. If Helen was a Reaper, the Tribunal's sentence was invalid. She wasn't a criminal. She was one of his kind. But the Tribunal didn't care about nuance. They feared what they couldn't control. And now, they would come for both of them. "I can't execute you," Paul said. Helen stepped forward. "Then help me." Paul hesitated. He had never broken protocol, never defied the Tribunal. But Helen's presence stirred something in him, something buried, a longing, a rebellion. He nodded once. "We'll fake your death. They won't come near me. They never do." Helen's eyes widened. "You'd risk everything?" Paul turned toward the door. "I already have." Chapter 4. The Execution That Wasn't. The guards stood at attention, but none dared look Paul in the eye. He moved through the Tribunal's corridors like a specter, Helen's limp form cradled in his arms. Her skin was cool, her breath shallow. She had taken a sedative to mimic death. It was a gamble. If anyone touched her, the illusion would shatter. They would die, but no one did. Paul's reputation preceded him. His touch was final. No one questioned the aftermath of his executions. No one verified. They simply recorded the disappearance and moved on. He reached the departure bay. The Styx waited, its hull gleaming like a black mirror. A warden approached, eyes wide, voice trembling. "Is it done?" Paul didn't answer. He simply nodded and stepped aboard. The doors sealed behind him. Inside, Helen stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she sat up slowly, rubbing her temples. Did they believe it? Paul activated the ship's cloaking protocols. "They always do." Helen exhaled, relief and fear tangled in her breath. "Then we're fugitives now." Paul didn't respond. He was already plotting their course, away from tribunal space, away from surveillance grids, away from everything that had defined his existence. The Styx hummed as it slipped into the void. But the Tribunal was not blind. Within minutes, a red alert pulsed across the station. A surveillance drone had flagged an anomaly, Helen's biometric signature still active. The deception unraveled faster than expected. Paul's console flared with incoming transmissions, warnings, threats, orders. He silenced them all. "We need a destination," Helen said, gripping the edge of the console. "Somewhere they won't follow." Paul's eyes narrowed. "There's a rumor, a planet where death doesn't exist, where Reapers are powerless." Helen turned to him, hope flickering. "You think it's real?" "I think it's our only chance." The Styx accelerated, vanishing into a wormhole. Behind them, the Tribunal mobilized its elite enforcers, the Virex, trained to hunt the untraceable, conditioned to resist fear. But even they hesitated when the target was Paul Erebus. Chapter 5. The Hunt Begins. The Styx tore through subspace, its cloaking field shimmering like a mirage against the stars. Inside, Paul stood at the helm, eyes locked on the navigation stream. Helen sat nearby, her knees drawn to her chest, watching him with a quiet intensity. Neither spoke. Words felt too fragile for what they'd just done. They had defied the Tribunal. They had faked an execution. And now they were being hunted. Paul's console pulsed with encrypted chatter. Tribunal frequencies, mobilization orders. The Virex were awake. Helen leaned forward. Who are they? Paul didn't look at her. Enforcers, genetically enhanced, psychologically conditioned. They don't fear death. They don't fear me. Helen's voice dropped. But they should. Paul's silence was answer enough. The Virex were bred for one purpose, to eliminate threats that couldn't be reasoned with. They operated outside the law, beyond diplomacy. And now they had a target unlike any before. 2 Reapers, 1 rogue, 1 unknown. Paul adjusted the ship's trajectory, skimming the edge of a dying star. Radiation flared across the hull, masking their trail. We need to disappear, he said, not just hide, erase ourselves. Helen stood and approached the console. Her fingers hovered over the map. There's a system near the galactic rim. It's barely charted. No tribunal presence. No colonies. Paul scanned the coordinates. Too exposed, she pointed again. Then here, the Nebula of Thorns. It's unstable, but there's a rumor. He turned to her. Haven. Helen nodded. The planet where death doesn't exist. Paul hesitated. He'd heard the stories. A world immune to entropy. A place where Reapers were powerless. But it was myth. A whisper passed between exiles. No one had ever returned to confirm it. Do you believe it's real? He asked. Helen's eyes didn't waver. I have to. Paul locked in the course. Behind them, the Tribunal's command ship Judicator Prime emerged from hyperspace, sleek, silver, and bristling with weapons. The Virex deployed in silence, 12 figures in metallic armor, each one trained to kill without hesitation. The hunt had begun, and Paul Erebus was no longer the hunter. Chapter 6. The Virex Trap. The sticks dropped out of hyperspace into the shadow of a fractured moon. Paul scanned the perimeter. No signals, no heat signatures, just debris and silence. The moon, once a mining colony, had been abandoned after a reactor implosion. Now it was a graveyard of twisted metal and forgotten ambition, perfect for refueling. Helen moved through the ship's lower deck, her fingers trailing along the cold walls. This place feels haunted, she said. Paul didn't respond. He was listening, to the silence, to the static, to the rhythm of the void. Something was off. Too quiet, too still. They docked near a collapsed hangar. Paul exited first, his cloak billowing in the low gravity. Helen followed, her steps cautious. The air was breathable, barely. The reactor core still pulsed beneath the surface, enough to power their ship for another jump. But they weren't alone. The first Virex appeared like a shadow peeling from the wall. Silver armor, faceless helm, pulse rifle aimed. Paul reacted instantly, stepping between Helen and the Enforcer. The Virex didn't fire. It waited. Then 2 more emerged, then 5, then all 12. A perfect circle. No words, no threats. Just inevitability. Helen's breath caught. They're not afraid of you. Paul's voice was low. They were trained not to be. The lead Virex stepped forward. Paul Erebus, you are in violation of Tribunal Protocol 7. Surrender the fugitive. Paul didn't move. She's not a fugitive, she's a Reaper. The Virex paused, a flicker of uncertainty, then irrelevant. She is unregistered, unauthorized, dangerous. Helen stepped forward. I didn't choose this. I didn't ask for it. The Virex raised its weapon. Paul moved faster than thought. His hand touched the Enforcer's chest, and nothing happened. The armor was insulated. The Virex had adapted. Paul staggered back. The circle tightened. Helen reached for him, her fingers brushing his wrist. A pulse of energy surged through the air, raw, ancient, defiant. The nearest Virex collapsed, not dead, but stunned. The others hesitated. Paul seized the moment. He activated the Styx's remote beacon. The ship roared to life, its engines flaring. Debris scattered. The ground shook. Helen dove into the cockpit. Paul followed, covering their retreat. The ship lifted, breaking through the moon's crust, vanishing into the stars. Behind them, the Virex regrouped. The Tribunal would not accept failure, and Paul Erebus had just become the galaxy's most wanted myth. Chapter 7. Echoes of the Past. The Styx drifted through the nebula of thorns, its hull shimmering with ion residue and fractured light. Outside, the stars twisted like memories, half-formed, half-forgotten. The nebula was unstable, a graveyard of failed experiments and lost civilizations. But somewhere within its chaos, Paul believed, lay haven. Helen sat at the ship's archive terminal, scanning ancient records. Her fingers moved quickly, eyes sharp. "There's a pattern," she said. "Every 100 years, someone mentions it. A planet where death doesn't happen, where reapers lose their power." Paul leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. Fairy tale. A story told to keep us sane. Helen looked up. Or a truth buried to keep us contained. She pulled up a file, encrypted, fragmented. A name flickered across the screen. Haven. Coordinates half erased. A symbol resembling a spiral sun. Paul stared at it, something stirring in his memory. "I've seen that before," he said. "On Mortania, carved into the cliff walls. I thought it was just erosion." Helen's voice dropped. "It's a map." Paul stepped closer. The symbol pulsed faintly, as if responding to his presence. The ship's sensors flared, an anomaly detected. A gravitational distortion, hidden deep within the nebula. Helen smiled. "We're close." But the moment shattered. The Styx's proximity alarm screamed. A vessel had entered the nebula, sleek, fast, armed, Tribunal design. The Virex had found them. Paul activated evasive protocols. The ship dove through plasma storms and collapsing wormholes. Helen clung to the console, her eyes wide. "They're adapting, learning." Paul's voice was grim. "They always do." The Virex ship fired, a precision blast that grazed their hull. Systems flickered. Paul rerouted power, pushing the Styx deeper into the distortion. The nebula warped around them, light bending, time stuttering. And then silence. They emerged into a pocket of stillness. A planet hovered below, wrapped in golden mist. Its surface shimmered like liquid memory. No satellites, no signals, no decay. Helen whispered, "Haven." Paul stared, heart pounding. "We found it." But something felt wrong. The planet was alive, and it was watching them. Chapter 8. The Immortal Planet. Haven shimmered beneath them like a dream half-remembered. Golden mist veiled its surface, swirling in patterns that defied physics. The Styx hovered above the atmosphere, its sensors struggling to define the planet's composition. No decay, no entropy, no measurable mortality. Paul stood at the viewport, silent. Helen joined him, her voice hushed. "It's beautiful." Paul didn't answer. He felt it, the planet's heartbeat. Not mechanical, not biological. Something older, something watching. They descended. The ship pierced the mist and landed on a field of crystalline grass. The air was warm, fragrant with scents that didn't exist elsewhere, like memory and light. Trees shimmered with translucent leaves. Rivers flowed uphill, time bent gently like wind through silk. Helen stepped out first. The ground welcomed her. No resistance, no threat. Paul followed, his boots leaving no imprint. The planet did not record their presence. It simply accepted it. A figure approached, tall, robed in silver threads, eyes like twin suns. Not human, not alien. something else, something native. You are not the first, the figure said, its voice echoed in their minds. But you may be the last. Paul stepped forward. You know what we are. The figure nodded. You are death, but here, death is forbidden. Helen's breath caught. Why? The figure turned, gesturing to the horizon. Because we chose to forget it. Long ago, we severed the thread. No one dies here. No one is born. We are what remains. Paul frowned. Then we can't stay. The figure's gaze sharpened. You can, but you must choose. Helen stepped closer. Choose what? To surrender your touch, to become part of the stillness. No more executions, no more endings. Paul felt the weight of it, the offer, the trap. Helen looked at him. We could be free. Paul looked at the horizon, endless, golden, silent. Freedom without purpose, immortality without meaning. He turned back to the figure. And if we refuse? The mist darkened, the figure's voice dropped. Then Haven will refuse you. Chapter 9. The Choice. Haven pulsed beneath their feet, alive in ways no planet should be. The golden mist had thinned, revealing a city carved from light, structures that shimmered like memories, streets that rearranged themselves with thought. The inhabitants moved slowly, deliberately, as if time no longer mattered. Their faces were serene, untouched by age or sorrow. Helen wandered among them, her steps light, her eyes wide. She felt it, the stillness, the peace. No fear, no guilt, no death. Paul watched from a distance. He didn't trust it. The silver-robed figure returned, its voice echoing in their minds. You have seen what we offer. Now you must choose. Helen turned to Paul. We could stay. No more running. No more executions. Paul's jaw tightened. And no more purpose. Helen stepped closer. Isn't this what we've wanted? A place where we're not weapons? Paul looked at the city. Beautiful, eternal, hollow. We were made to end things. That's not cruelty. That's balance. Helen's voice cracked. Balance? I never asked to take lives. I never wanted this. Paul's silence was heavy. The silver-robed figure spoke again. To remain, you must surrender your touch. Haven will strip it from you. You will be like us, immortal, inert. Paul turned away. And if we leave? The figure's eyes dimmed. You will be hunted. The Tribunal will not stop. The Virex will adapt. You will die. Helen's breath caught. But we'll die free. Paul looked at her, truly looked. She was tired, haunted, but alive. More alive than anyone he'd ever met. He reached for her hand. She didn't flinch. Their fingers touched, and nothing happened. Paul whispered, We choose freedom. The figure bowed. Then Haven will remember you. As they returned to the sticks, the mist thickened. The city faded. The planet began to forget them. And far above, in the cold reaches of space, the Judicator Prime adjusted course. The Tribunal was coming. Chapter 10. The Tribunal's Arrival. Haven began to dim. The golden mist that once shimmered with serenity now pulsed with unease. The planet, sentient in ways no science could explain, had sensed the approach of something foreign, something violent. The Judicator Prime dropped out of hyperspace like a blade unsheathed. Its hull gleamed with Tribunal sigils, its weapons primed. Inside, the Virex stood in formation, 12 enforcers, silent, faceless, ready. Their mission was clear. Retrieve the fugitives, neutralize resistance, reassert control. Paul watched from the Styx's command cradle, his jaw clenched. They found us, he said. Helen stood beside him, her expression unreadable. Haven won't let them land. Paul shook his head. Haven doesn't kill. It forgets. Outside, the planet's atmosphere thickened, forming a barrier of light and memory. The Judicator Prime fired a probe. It dissolved on contact. The Tribunal's commander issued a warning. Surrender or be erased. Paul activated the ship's defense grid. We're not surrendering. Helen touched his arm. We can't fight them. Not here. Paul turned to her. Then we make them doubt. He opened a channel to the Judicator Prime. His voice was calm, deliberate. Helen Standish is not a criminal. She is a reaper. Her touch is not a weapon. It's a condition. You sentenced her without understanding. The Tribunal's reply was cold. She is unauthorized. You are rogue. Haven is outside jurisdiction. Paul stepped forward. Then come down. See what death means here. Silence. Then movement. One Virex descended, landing on the crystalline field. Paul and Helen met him at the edge of the city. The Enforcer raised his weapon but hesitated. The planet pulsed beneath his feet. His armor flickered. Helen stepped forward. You don't have to fear me. She reached out and touched his hand. Nothing happened. The Virex staggered back, stunned. His systems scrambled. His protocols failed. He looked at Helen, not as a target, but as something impossible. Paul spoke softly. She's not a threat. She's proof. The Virex returned to the ship. Minutes passed. Then the Judicator Prime turned, slowly, silently, and vanished into hyperspace. Haven pulsed again, brighter this time. The Tribunal had not accepted defeat, but they had seen something they couldn't explain, and that was enough, for now. Chapter 11. The Touch Reversed. The sticks hovered above Haven's surface, cloaked in silence. Inside, Paul and Helen sat across from each other, the glow of the planet casting soft light across their faces. Neither spoke. The Tribunal had retreated, for now. But the question lingered. Why? Helen broke the silence. They saw something they couldn't explain. Paul nodded. You touched a Virex, and he lived. Helen looked down at her hands. It felt different, like something shifted inside me. Paul leaned forward. Your touch didn't kill. It healed. Helen's eyes widened. Is that possible? Paul stood and paced. Reapers were designed to end life, but Haven rewrites laws. Maybe it rewrote us. Helen rose and approached him. Then we need to test it. Paul hesitated. On who? The answer came sooner than expected. A distress beacon flared across the console, an escape pod drifting near Haven's orbit. Inside, a single life form, a wounded Virex soldier, barely alive. Tribunal protocol would have left him to die, but Haven had drawn him in. Paul and Helen retrieved the pod. The soldier lay unconscious, his armor cracked, his pulse fading. Paul stepped back. If you're wrong, Helen knelt beside him. Then he dies anyway. She placed her hand on his chest. A pulse of light surged through the room, gentle, warm, impossible. The soldier gasped, eyes snapping open. His wounds closed, his breathing steadied. Paul stared. Helen whispered, I didn't take his life. I gave it back. The soldier looked at her, stunned. You're not executioners. Paul stepped forward. We were. Now we're something else. The soldier returned to the Judicator Prime with a message. The Reapers had changed. The Tribunal received it in silence. Their doctrine, absolute, unquestioned, had cracked. And across the galaxy, whispers began. Of a Reaper who could heal, of an executioner who chose mercy, of a planet that rewrote fate. Chapter 12. A New Beginning. The message spread like wildfire. A Reaper had healed a Virex. The Tribunal's enforcers, once symbols of absolute control, had witnessed the impossible. Helen Standish's touch, once feared as lethal, had become something else, something sacred. Across the galaxy, whispers turned into questions. Had the Tribunal been wrong? Was death no longer the final word? On Haven, the golden mist shimmered brighter. The planet responded to change, not with violence but with memory. It remembered Helen's mercy. It remembered Paul's defiance. And it began to reshape itself. Structures of light emerged from the soil. Pathways formed between cities that had never been connected. The inhabitants, ageless, silent, began to speak again. Not in words, but in gestures, in shared dreams. Helen stood at the center of it all. She was no longer hiding, no longer afraid. Her presence rippled through the planet like a song. Paul watched her, a quiet awe in his eyes. He had spent centuries ending lives. Now he stood beside someone who could restore them. The Tribunal remained silent. Their ships retreated. Their broadcasts ceased. But Paul knew silence was not surrender. It was recalibration. They would return, not with weapons, but with questions, with fear disguised as diplomacy. Helen turned to Paul. "We can't run anymore." Paul nodded. "Then we make a stand." They opened Haven's gates, not to armies, not to governments, to the forgotten, the hunted, the misunderstood, reapers in exile, refugees from broken systems, healers mistaken for threats. They came in silence, drawn by myth, by hope, by the promise of something new. And Haven welcomed them. Paul and Helen stood at the threshold of a new era, not executioners, not fugitives, but founders. The galaxy watched, and the legend began. Chapter 13. A New Legend. The stars above Haven shimmered differently now, not with indifference, but with awareness. The galaxy had changed. The Tribunal's silence was no longer dominance. It was uncertainty. And uncertainty, Paul Erebus knew, was the first crack in any empire. He stood at the edge of the crystalline field, watching new arrivals step through the mist. Reapers, exiles, survivors, each one drawn by the same whisper. There is a place where death has no dominion. Helen walked beside him, her presence radiant. She had become more than a myth. She was a symbol. Not of power, but of possibility. Her touch, once feared, now healed. Her name, once condemned, now carried in reverence. Paul had changed too. He no longer wore the cloak of the executioner. He had folded it, sealed it, and placed it in the archives beneath Haven's surface. It was not forgotten, but it was no longer needed. The Tribunal sent envoys now, not soldiers, not threats, diplomats. They came with questions, not commands. They asked how Haven worked, how Reapers could be reformed, how death could be rewritten. Paul gave them no answers. Some truths, he believed, were earned, not explained. Helen stood before the gathered exiles, her voice clear. "We are not weapons. We are not curses. We are the balance, and now we choose what that means." The crowd listened, the planet pulsed, and somewhere, deep in the archives of the Tribunal, a new entry was made. Haven Protocol, Reaper Class Reformation. Status, unresolved. Recommendation, observation. Paul smiled. Let them observe. Let them watch as myths became movements, as fugitives became founders, as death became something else. He took Helen's hand, and for the first time in centuries, Paul Erebus felt what it meant to live. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.